Wonderful to be here. Firstly, this place is incredible. This is my first time here, and I've heard a lot about it. So I'm very excited to be here from the other side of the professional world. Let me say thank you for the invite. Firstly, I've already heard a lot of excited rumblings of you all being here and wanting to learn what it is you're wanting to sessions you wanted to take and learn about, and that makes me just extremely happy to hear the young and excited voices focusing on something that I'm myself am very passionate about too. So let me introduce myself. I'm Rolf. I do design leadership at Fetch. But this talk, I won't spend a lot of time talking about exactly what Fetch does or specifically my portfolio, because I want to share a bit more about some of that intangible wisdom and experience that I've learned over years that may not be taught in school, and especially as it applies to future careers in UX and adjacent disciplines. So. Quick poll, because I'm not completely sure on the makeup of the audience here, but how many of you are designers? Okay, and then more engineering side? Few, and then researchers? Cool. So pretty good mix. This is awesome. So before I jump in, I feel the need to give you a little bit of I'm morally obligated to instruct you all that this conversation isn't intended to produce any behavior that might be detrimental to your health or well-being. And there's going to be a lot of nonsense. But I am here to talk to you a bit about what your design experience can look like through the lens of not just career, but also life, applying some of the lessons that can be your long-term goals in developing your craft and your career, and how to apply them day in and day out, not just in the workplace setting. So before I get to that goal, though, I'm also going to address what experiencing your design looks like with awareness and intentionality, that day-to-day being present and observant. But first, I have to start with your design experience. And I know this feels a little bit like lazy writing, that I could only pick from 3 words, but I have a purpose, I promise. So many of you are students, and it may seem like on paper that your experience doesn't yet amount to much. That it's just limited, right? You have your years of schooling and maybe an internship or maybe a personal project, or maybe a couple of you might be out of school and have some work experience, but you always have that looming question of what is my next step? Is my portfolio really truly a reflection of the value that I know I can bring? The kind of self-doubt that we talk about, imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? And I want to assuage you and let you know that I've had those thoughts as well, but there's ways to kind of move past that and get past those questions that you ask yourself. So I want to share a little bit of my experience and hopefully provide you some optimism on that front. But also some methods for dealing with the very real, extremely human part of a career in UX. So how did I get here? Well, there's a few factors, a bit of twists and turns, and over time, seems like my father got a hold of my presentation. Sorry. How did I get here? That's the slide I meant to show. There are a lot of things that I didn't know, and I kind of allowed myself to explore a lot of the pieces that I didn't know, just like you do in a UX project. You discover things, you learn, and you move forward. So my career journey looked a little bit like this. There's a lot of cool logos and a lot of interesting work that I've been able and fortunate to touch over time. But even with my first job, before that, I had to learn. I had to go to school. And when I had first left home and gone off to college, first time being on my own, I had actually declared as a mechanical engineering major because I thought math and science was really like the only way that I had to contribute to society, to fit in. And then at about 19, 20 years old, I realized that maybe just being good at math and science wasn't the only thing that I can contribute to society. And furthermore, that fitting in wasn't something that I was great at. So a few things happened in college that changed my perception of how I thought, and I think for the better. When I first went off to school, as many of you do, you try to meet new friends. You try to make connections. You try to have a pleasant human experience. And there was one such event that occurred to me. I was hanging out with these new people that I'd met at school in downtown Fort Worth. I'm from Texas. Don't hold that against me. But we were hanging out in downtown Fort Worth, and from across the street, someone was like, "Hey, Rolf!" Recognized me, a family friend that I'd grown up with. And normally this is like a coincidence that nobody really thinks about. Oh, you know somebody, sure. But the problem is I grew up with the circus, so this is what recognized me. In that moment, I began to think that maybe people find this not normal. And I knew that because those new friends that I had tried to make actually ran away because he was in full makeup, full outfit, and yelling my name from across the street. So yeah, growing up with entertainers, it was something that I didn't see as extraordinary, something that I just had internalized as, yeah, this is normal. This is what I grow up with. But it was one of those few moments that helped me to understand that having a unique human experience was extremely valuable and something that could be applicable to my future. So I became a designer. And over time, I realized that solely just having design experience isn't enough to advance your career, nor is it a way to stay motivated or stay satisfied. The truth of the matter is that you don't just have years of theoretical experience. Your experience is being human. And to be prepared for life in the field, you can multiply the theory, the practice that you're learning in school, with practical experience of being a person, because you're intending to design and create for other people. That experience really puts us all on a level playing field, and it accounts for a lot. So fixed it. It's just your experience. So this is you, or at least this line represents the core of who you are. And throughout your life, you do things. We kind of call those life stages. You grow up, you learn some, you work hard, you retire, maybe. Maybe you love what you do so much you don't. And most of you are probably currently in the learn some stage. Oh, that's interesting. You can think back to lessons that you've learned from previous schooling or things that your parents taught you in that growing up phase that still apply right now. And that's because what you do can be additive to future life stages. So what I mean by that is, like, those of you that understand me right now, it's because you learned English at some point. And those of you that don't, I'm really sorry. The rest of this presentation is in English. Lo siento. So not only can the things that you do build on your working knowledge for future life stages, but they should add to who you are. If they don't, why do them? I'm not talking about like avoiding paying taxes. That's not what I mean. The things you choose to do and how you choose to leverage those experiences to benefit you are completely within your control, even though things in life occur that aren't. Another interesting consideration about what you do in life is how that works in the overall equation of things. Because what you do, those additive steps, you grow up, you learn some, you work hard, and retire, those aren't even close to equaling the value of who you are. If you add them all up, what you do is not equal to who you are. It's just a piece of it. But if you change the equation a little bit, you being so valuable, and you think of the impact of multiplying who you are by what you do, it's just barely changing the formula, but it makes a huge difference. The most incredible thing about UX is that it's one of only a very few disciplines that everything in your past, everything that you experience is applicable. Everything. You can't hear a brain surgeon saying that. Like they have a very specific craft and training, and that's what applies to what they do. But if you use and leverage who you are as a multiplier, it can make all the difference in your day-to-day, your school, your career, your relationships, you name it. I say it's a multiplier because in a field like UX, it exponentially impacts what you're truly capable of doing if you let it. Another way to think of this is your foundation. You're building the foundation. And like a foundation to a building, if you build a strong enough one, you can build anything on top of that. You can't just start with the first floor and assume that the third floor, fifth floor will be structurally sound if you don't work on that foundation, if you don't have a strong enough foundation. So if you look at this and say, this is a resume, a portfolio, it only reflects a glimpse, a stage of life that future employers, people that will look at your portfolio, will look at your resume and say, oh, look at this experience they have. That's just, that work hard stage. Let's zoom out a bit. By taking this larger view, you could see more things that an individual has done over time, but it's still just a list of experiences. It's that what they do. How do we get to know the essentials of who we are? What's foundational to our human experience? And leverage that for our future efforts and in building experiences for others. We do that by experiencing our design. So what happens when you go to class, Google a search, chat with GPT, or is that how it works? I don't know. You likely learn something, right? It's pretty easy to take the results and learn from what your queries are. Show of hands, though. Do you think that changes you? Inside, do you think that changes you as a person? No, no hands. Because you likely just use that to learn something. And that adds to your overall experience, but what happens if you take away those parameters, those guidelines, and have to experience the world outside of that guided experience? Well, you're kind of forced to learn through experience. You gain wisdom, right? And those experiences likely make you feel something. So when you internalize those feelings as a part of the experience, you gain this perspective, and that perspective can be biased, which most of us have probably heard, is not great for solving problems for others when we bring our own bias into it. I'm not suggesting that you build all of your experiences on your own personal bias, but what I'm attempting to get to here is, like, you remember that line. This is you, but from a different perspective. It's a circle this time. So when we encounter experiences, we have this range of emotions, and they can be kind of all over the place. It's like a wheel of emotional perspective. And when faced with any experience, it's reasonable to assume that you're going to have some feeling with it. We're human. Some of us are more robotic than others, but we still generally have a feeling attached to it. So being social creatures, we have shared experiences in gathering with others, public spaces. So it's often that our perspective isn't even the only one in the picture. There's all of you. We're all here. We're all having a shared experience currently. It's important to understand that all of these shared experiences can have different emotional entry and exit points too for everyone present, right? So there's an overlap. One experience could result in multiple emotions. So the overlap, it's a shared experience and clearly different outcomes. As humans, like, this is a prime opportunity to practice empathy, but we tend to react initially with our own bias still, just in the moment. It's just kind of what we know. It's the first thing that takes over us. And empathy takes work. It's learned behavior. It can be tricky or difficult. Like my wife and I, we have different reactions to watching Titanic for the 12th time. Like, doesn't mean I don't get her being teary-eyed at the end. It's just like, I tend to be really confused at the actions of the captain. After the second time, I have memorized the schedule of that iceberg, and after the 12th watch, he still hits it, so I don't know what's going on. Where empathy is practiced most often in our day-to-day actually occurs after, when somebody tells a story, because they're telling it from their perspective. We understand kind of what their emotions are throughout. But in UX, we have to anticipate. We have to understand what somebody coming into an experience is, what their attitude, emotions are during the experience, so that we can ensure that the outcome is positive, right? That's a lot of control that we have. But we can often feel like we're out of control, like there's not a lot of control in our life. But you have more control over positive outcomes than you think. It just depends on how you tell the story. So I'm going to tell you a story right now. This is the DART. It's the light rail in Dallas, and I rode this to and from a job working at Southwest, actually. So it was a random Tuesday. I was on my way home, just a long day of adulting, and the train was packed like sardines if sardines had backpacks and baby strollers. But otherwise, your typical commute, the happy path, right? It's getting us from point A to point B. At one stop, West End Station, downtown, the doors were closing, and a pigeon was like, "Hold the door," and flew in at the last minute. This is kind of a funny idea, a pigeon needing an alternate mode of transport, right? They can fly. So you would expect people might have pulled out their phones, tried to take a picture for Instagram, or, in the very least offer him a seat. He was clearly tired, maybe a tiny newspaper. No, just absolute pandemonium. People freaked out. For the next 60 seconds that it took to get to Ackerd Station, you would have thought that train had turned into a movie set for a zombie apocalypse film. I wish I'm kidding, but this is totally true. People were screaming, crawling over each other. It was like a sick game of human Tetris. Some people were even using others' baby strollers as like barricades. Like it was a pigeon, okay? And what did the pigeon do in all of this? He just stood there like a seasoned commuter. The doors opened at the next stop and he was like, all right, I'm out, and just walked off. Leaving behind him just absolute wreckage and shattered dignity of everyone on that red line, who then had to face each other for the next 45 minutes to the end of line. It was dead silent. Eyes downcast, people truly embarrassed by their actions. And I think about this moment a lot because I don't think I've ever laughed that hard. I just tears streaming down my face. But also I think about it as it has a correlation to UX. I'm not talking about like pigeons on a train, but that every experience is an opportunity to earn a story. And in earning these stories, we naturally categorize them and build a library. We build our own library of these stories. In UX, like your power isn't just understanding what a user wants. That's kind of the bare minimum. I'd argue doing so isn't even designing an experience. It's just kind of creating tasks and at the very end of the day, like hoping that the reviews on the App Store say works as intended, Finding what creates compelling experiences, though, that is what enables users to tell a story. That's what we should strive for. But for ourselves first. We can communicate better with others when we understand experiences that they've had. And we can meet them on that level. We can talk to them in that same way. If we asked a commuter to tell a story about riding a train, I can almost guarantee that none of them would just say, yeah, I get on at this stop. I sit a while, I get off at that stop. It's a boring story. It doesn't do anybody any good. It accomplished the question, but it's not poignant. They'll probably draw from the most interesting instance they can think of, right? Unless they were one of the people that used a baby stroller as a barricade, in which they might conveniently omit that story. But if you can understand that there is emotional entry points, that there are multiple perspectives for those experiences, and craft that criteria for the experiences that you build for others, it makes an easier pathway forward. So saying, what's the most scared you've ever been on the train? Or how about the hardest you've ever laughed in public, right? Those might be questions that would result in the same story. But we're talking in human, relatable terms, and the categories, the subsets that we categorize stories for ourselves. So think about Netflix. You know how they have those categories and the subsets that sometimes are like really ultra specific, and you probably haven't seen every film in that category, but you've seen one, or you've seen one that's similar to one in there. And then it allows you to kind of like grow and expand your horizons because it's giving you suggestions that are tagged in similar ways. Think about that, but like Netflix for life, by categorizing your stories and then speaking to others in the same manner. We all just naturally do this, but we don't think about it a lot. So allowing them to have their emotional entry points and utilizing that human aspect to it can help us craft experiences in a way that provides high levels of intent for our users and allows them to get through their stories that we craft. But how do we also tell those stories? How do we give them opportunities to tell stories? that kind of starts with intent. Think about not just writing stories for users, but like how do we tell the stories for our stakeholders? How do we get them on board? How do we drive alignment? Who was able to attend the metacognitive sessions that they had here a few weeks ago? Was anybody able to go to those? Okay, I'll grossly oversimplify the idea of it, but metacognitive skills are skills that teach you ways of thinking about your thinking. So thus the meta aspect. So I'm going to really oversimplify it for illustration purposes, but think about them in a couple of stages. What happens before, during, and after. And let's take an example that we can all relate to. We've all taken a trip, right? Before that trip, chances are we planned a bit. But how did we decide that we were going to take that experience? We had the intent to have a novel, relaxing, or adventurous time. What about during the trip? What did you monitor during the trip? Did you just mindlessly take photos because you're a robot and that's what you were supposed to do? No, you probably wanted to capture a feeling of being in awe of nature, of architecture or art. We spend a majority of our time there thinking about how pleasant it is, that we're enjoying our time. We don't think about the work that we have to do at home, like we're on a trip. And when we return, we talk about the food, the places, the people. We give recommendations to our friends, like, hey, you should enjoy this. Like, you should go there. It was awesome. We immediately start thinking about what our next trip might be, and planning that because we had so much fun on this trip being intentional and being purposeful. So why is it that going through our day-to-day is any different than that? Why is it that we only choose to be more intentional when we're spending money somewhere else? That's a question I want to challenge, because intent takes practice, just like empathy takes practice. It's learned behavior. To understand someone else's feelings, to understand your own intent, it takes awareness and care and consistent thinking about your own thinking. Some people meditate or use journals to practice as mindfulness. And if you don't really know where to start, here's kind of a simple activity to get you a glimpse of like that headspace. So write down experiences that have had an impact on you. You could start from whenever you can remember and come up till now. Write down any experience that had an impact on you. No moment is too big or too small. If they had an impact, they're real. Then answer, did you plan for them to happen? Was it completely beyond your control? Did it involve other people or weather? It could be anything. Did you make mistakes during that time? What was the end impact on your life? Did it change your values, your methods? Did it validate or correct assumptions? Think of the impact as learnings that have changed the way that you operate. Okay, so here's a concrete example of if I was applying that framework that happened to me. When I was young, I had a speech impediment. I couldn't say my R's very well, which is a huge problem because my name is Rolf. This was great. There was one moment that made a huge impact on me, and I was 3 years old. And really strangely, I remember it clear as day today. That was 34 years ago. It was a long time ago. I was very young, but it made a huge impact on me. I wanted a piece of bread. And so my plan to get said piece of bread was to crawl up on my father's lap and ask him for bread. But with my speech impediment, it came out sounding like, I want some blood. To which my dad, being the goofball that he is, said, gross, Rolf, I'm not going to get you blood. In that moment, I knew what I wanted, and I thought, maybe he just misheard me. So I repeated myself, and he said, no, we're not vampires. I am not going to get you blood. It was then that I realized, like, if I wanted to truly achieve bread, I had to address my own shortcomings and ensure that I could encode a message in a way that would be received as I intended. So I said, I want some toast. And I got that piece of bread, actually. Such a seemingly insignificant event, but it had a monumental impact on my life. It changed my assumption as a 3-year-old that everyone could just simply understand each other. I learned that so young. Like, that's crazy. It impacted my methods of communicating, being able to rephrase ideas, to be more effective, to meet others midway. It impacted my values, that every effort to communicate was worth attempting. Even if that effort might feel like it was worth more, like it was more work than to just achieve the goal on your own. Like, I could have climbed up on the counter, maybe, and got the bread myself, but man, this lesson is super, super useful. Unsurprisingly, communication is like 70, 80% of my role as a designer, and now it's even more. Like, it never lessens, like your percent of role to communication doesn't ever go away. So if you're intentional about your experiences and you understand that you're valuable just because you're human, how can we then ensure that we know when it's the right time to put that effort into designing our own experience? Well, always is the answer. It's always the right time. And it will always be rewarding. In UX, we expect our experience to solve problems for others, right? And we consider a good experience to be one that users find efficient, entertaining, or rewarding in some fashion. So let's take a journey you know well, coming to class. Would you say that's a good experience? Likely, probably not. Pretty neutral. I just show up, right? I come to class, and you probably don't think about it a lot past the first week. You get your schedule, you learn where the classroom is, and then past that, you just kind of repeat. You go into habit mode or autopilot, and it feels super, super familiar. Speaking of familiar, does anybody know what this is? It's just a triangle. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. But I'm going to use it to illustrate an idea penned by Charles Duhigg. It's called the habit loop. And it looks a little bit like this. So it starts with a cue, which is what kicks your brain into autopilot. It's that prompt, that thing that you say, hey, I need to go to class. And so that's the first step. Then the routine, the physical, the mental, the emotional response, the thing that actually moves you towards your reward. And the reward, class time, learning, that's the prize that tells your brain that the loop is worth repeating. And this loop can be applied to big, small tasks. It can be applied to methods of thinking and ways of being. So what if we apply this framework to get rewarded with more understanding and more enjoyment of the world around us? We can reap rewards of more stories for the libraries, in our categories. We can gain methods to more readily gain empathy for others, or wisdom, in which to jumpstart our design process. It seems like such an abstract idea, but it really, really isn't. Not if we make the journey our reward. And by that, I mean, can you think of the last time that you intentionally addressed inefficiencies in your trip to class? What about the last time you actively took a detour on purpose? Like just on purpose, not because there was construction, just for enjoyment or exposure to new sights, new sounds. We assume these routines and habits because of familiarity, because they're the safe way to achieve our goal. But it doesn't allow room for creativity, for surprise and delight. It's just kind of a pretty straightforward path, and it actually doesn't bring that much value to our daily lives. Sure, we get our reward, we get our end goal, but it isn't likely to bring us new stories. It isn't likely to allow us to relate to others who experience different things than us. So when we become so used to something, it becomes mundane, commonplace, and we're even less likely to share it with others. I didn't tell anybody that I grew up with the circus because I was used to it, right? I could have preemptively told my friends, oh yeah, I know a bunch of clowns. But yeah, I just was very used to that behavior, and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary for me. What makes us human is that we tell stories of who we are and what we've experienced, and that has unique value. But we can all too easily lose that humanity when we practice our habits without intention. Like too much process. First I have to do this, and then I have to do that. Or the daily grind of work culture, get in at 9, leave at 5, coping with bad bosses, stress. There's any amount of things that could impact our ability to grow and be able to tell stories. And that hurts us like personally, but the worst part is it like prevents us from being able to effectively tell them for our users too. If we're not meeting them midway, we're actually unintentionally creating bias in a different way. It's like we're overcompensating for eliminating our own bias in the experience. So I challenge and encourage you all to, like, as you learn your craft and like step out into the world of, be it corporate, agency, startup life, to always remember what inspired you to become a UXer in the first place is because you're human and you believe that others deserve better experiences. Don't forget to do that for yourselves. Thanks. I think we have a couple of minutes for any questions if you were interested or care. And then you can contact me, find any of my other stuff. Scan the QR, or that link will work as well. But, go ahead. I do. I'm great at parties. No, yeah, I do know how to juggle. I grew up, my father has been a puppeteer for 40 years. And so all of our family friends are clowns, magicians, comedians, you name it. Magical childhood for sure. A weird one though, a very weird one. Thanks for that question. I don't think anybody's asked me that before.
I have one question. Thank you for your presentation today. But when you had your lifespan and life cycles, you had like learning, working hard, and all this stuff. I'm kind of curious, what do you think about continuous learning even while you're working hard?
Everything, like I said, everything is additive. So just because that phase of your life might be constrained to, what we commonly think of as 18 years or so, like, yeah, continuous learning, it's like, we'll program things as progressive disclosure. meaning like we continually educate users as we build our experiences, but that's the same. You don't have a choice in life. If you choose to stop learning at 18, you're in for a world of hurt. Like you really don't have the choice. But if you actively seek it out, if it becomes part of your habit, like if that is your reward, then it becomes way easier. It's like a shortcut, really, to like start to understand, hey, these are the pain points for my users. These are pain points for just anyone else. Somebody else in a grocery store having problems with a cart with a rickety wheel, right? Like, what's to keep you from saying, hey, can I grab you in a different cart or anything like that, and improving their lives, their experience as they're shopping. Like, it's something that is human for sure. It's 100% human, but like if you can find ways to reward yourself in that, it becomes easier and less of that task of like, this is what I'm set here to do, to learn during this time period, and continue it on throughout the rest of forever. Did that answer your question?
Sort of. I actually have a follow-up question as
Sure.
well. Which one would you value more than from like schools and textbook knowledge versus real life experiences learning?
Oh gosh. I would say that you can learn from anywhere too. So that's not me saying I devalue schooling at all. It's hugely important. And whatever form that takes, I think is the bigger question, like traditional, non-traditional, whatever form that takes, it could take any shape. Same with experience in real world. The truth of the matter is one won't teach you everything you need to know regardless, right? So being open to learning things in experience, being able to learn things in a school setting or in a more formalized educational setting, watching a YouTube video, it keeps keeping your mind open to that, I think, is where you gain the most benefit. And again, over time and repeating that, if you don't know something, ask for help, right? Like that's a hard lesson for a lot of people to learn. But where do you learn that? You don't learn that necessarily at school, because you get a bad grade in school and you learned, I messed up, right? And sometimes you have great teachers that'll instruct you and help you along, but like otherwise, how do you continue to learn that methodology of improving your own misses? And that's like that exercise of did you plan it? Did it happen as planned? Was it beyond your control? Did you make mistakes? Being so intentional and inward looking on that front is also a way to help identify that, regardless of the format that you're learning through. That's a great question. That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I know it's nap time. I don't think we have that on the schedule, but if anyone else has any other questions, I'm more than happy to field them. Emily, I don't know who.
We are all good, so thank you so much, Rolf, for
Of course.
your time. And now we're heading out to all of our afternoon breakout sessions, so just check your schedules for where you want to go next. We're having sessions in Sunrise, which is just on the other side of the staircase over here. Classroom 1002, which is in the corner. Starlight, which is the big glass room on the corner. And then downstairs to the amphitheater if you're heading there. So you got about 10 minutes, go to the bathroom, and go to your
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all.